I think that allowing for the book being, after all, a parody, something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. We shall abolish the orgasm. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
What's going on, everyone? It's Nina Infinity. Welcome to my channel on this Thursday night. This is a special Breaking the Narrative show because it usually happens on Wednesday nights, but I had to make an exception for tonight because we have an epic guest. We have the guy, the most amazing lawyer. It's not Nick Rekieta. It's Mr. Barnes from Barnes Law. What's going on? How are you?
Good.
Yay, you look comfy.
Yeah, here in Tennessee.
Nice. Did you have a good Christmas?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Is it really cold there?
It was cold on Christmas Day. It's now getting back to more normal Tennessee weather.
Ah, nice. Okay, so I don't know if you know anything about me, so I'm going to kind of give you the lowdown of where I am, but where I came from. But I'm Canadian, and I was born in Iran. We moved to Canada when I was 10 years old, and I lived in Canada for most of my life until my husband and I decided to move to Cancun, Mexico. So that's where I am now because we saw the writings on the wall before everything, went crazy. And we moved down here, and we've been here for about 5-6 years now, and we absolutely love it. I love it. I think Mexico is amazing. But I was very much enthralled and I couldn't keep my eyes off Viva streams when the whole thing was going on with, the trucker convoy. So I really appreciated his coverage and, of course, yours as well. I've watched you for quite a long time. So I'm just like fangirling right now a little bit like, oh, my God, because, it's funny because you were more like my husband was like a huge fan of yours and told me about you. And I was a huge fan of Viva and I told him about him. And then he was like, wait, I think they streamed together. And then we put 2 and 2 together and we realized we like the same people. It was really funny. But yeah, tell everyone in the chat who you are, just in case people don't know you. Please let them know who you are and where they can find you before we get started.
Oh, sure. So they can find any and all the content of Viva and I at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And the great community of people that also share their own content, their own commentary, their own links to other information. It's basically great curated information if you're interested in if law and politics and cultures intersection. Mm-hmm. And so but yeah, I mean, I've been a lawyer now going on a better part of a quarter century from Southeast Tennessee, where I'm back for Christmas in Chattanooga. and practiced a wide range of law across the country, across the globe, really. And so I've had cases and clients all around the world, a range of politically all across the spectrum. You won't find it if you try to look me up on Wikipedia, because there's these people that wage war on my biography on Wikipedia. They're always
Oh, of course. I mean, you
Yeah.
represented Alex Jones. I think that pretty much sums up how alt-right and crazy you really
Right.
are, because, you know.
Well, it's always predictable as to where the hit was going to come from, as to which of my clients they highlighted. My comment used to be, I know that when someone was upset, when some potential client was upset with a client that I represented in the past, said, you don't have to worry, my clients hate each other. So I represented everybody from, on the left, Ralph Nader, Jill Stein, the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, an independent socialist candidate for the presidency, the Wesley Snipes, Joe Francis of Girls Gone Wild.
Wow. I didn't know that one. That's
yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that was interesting. That's definitely a story. And then on the right, the Libertarian Party, Donald Trump, Alex Jones, the Covington kids, the various conservative political parties, including the Tea Party activists and against the IRS, including the Constitution Party, the Taxpayers Party, the Libertarian Party. And then have represented a range of individuals in high-profile cases that people know from across the cultural, political, and economic sphere. Mostly got my reputation in criminal tax cases because of big cases that we won. So the New York Times put it, we won 3 of the 6 biggest criminal tax cases brought in the last half century. And then did a lot of civil rights cases that went up to a range of federal courts. I've appeared in almost every state in the country, either in state court or federal court, to handle a case of one type or another. I'm a member of the U.S. Supreme Court, licensed in Tennessee, Wisconsin, and California, as well as in a range of federal courts, tax court, court of claims, federal appeals court, Supreme Court, etc.
Wow.
And so so it's been most of my cases, the only thing that's really in common is that they're often politically tainted cases. They're cases that that have a risk of politics directing the outcome rather than facts and law. And obviously, representing Kyle Rittenhouse as an example of that. And I represented him in the civil context, then gave advice on on his criminal case, of course. But that was a case as an example where politics contaminated the case, its potential outcomes. The case that wouldn't have been brought normally. And almost all of my clients, even if they're well off, even if they're Donald Trump, even if they're Wesley Snipes, even if they're Girls Gone Wild, they're all who their other side has a lot more money and power. So they're always underdog cases. Most of my clients I've liked, most of my cases I've liked. Probably the only person I really despised was Joe Francis. But other than that, the rest were worthwhile cases.
You hated Joe Francis?
Oh, completely. I mean, I was ultimately able to withdraw from the case. He was being wrongfully set up by the IRS, and ultimately the outcome reflected that, because the ultimate outcome was he didn't serve any day in jail for the tax charges, paid no fine, no penalty, nothing. And it was an extraordinary outcome, and we were able to create that outcome by creating the defense in the first place. And there was some political manipulation of courts in Florida that was opposed to him for illegitimate reasons as opposed to legitimate reasons. But dealing with Joe was the most difficult client I've ever dealt with. I ultimately withdrew from the case relatively early on because really just despised him as a human being.
Oh, that's crazy. I mean, I get it, because law is crazy, and you're gonna run into some really weird people. But you've never really done criminal law, though. You're usually more like tax and civil rights and things like that. Right?
The criminal cases are either criminal tax cases or white collar cases.
Right.
So even in Francis's case, I was representing him in the criminal tax case, not any of the other cases against him.
Okay.
But so I would. That's not my area. I agree in theory with Alan Dershowitz, who says that a lawyer should be a cab driver and take whoever the fare is, and that's the only way the legal system will function effectively. But Dershowitz also advises lawyers to represent what they're passionate about. And I just can't represent people that I think are guilty in both a moral and legal sense. Now,
Sure.
I'll be honest, I think tax crimes are a crock. So,
Well, taxation is theft, right?
I mean, at some level, it's the state taking what often does not belong to them.
Right.
But most of the world doesn't criminalize tax. They just treat it as a financial issue.
Mm-hmm.
And America, along with Iran, Russia, a few places like that, are the only places that lock people up for this.
Canada does.
Yes, Canada,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, you look at them, it's countries that show, I mean, America particularly, it's ironic. It was founded on principles of being able to dissent over whether or not a tax is legally due or not. That's what, I mean, that was the Boston Tea Party. That was what the foundation, the trigger for the American Revolution was. So it's ironic that we are one of the most totalitarian countries, one of the most authoritarian countries when it comes to how we treat tax issues, particularly people, so-called tax protesters, many of whom I've represented, who are people who just disagree with the government about the tax laws. And these are people that should not, our U.S. Supreme Court has said they shouldn't be going to prison. And yet courts continually allow prosecutors to lock them up based on a range of poor prosecutorial conduct, in my view.
Well, and that's the interesting part, right? Because it's really interesting that America has become this country of you can't question daddy government. Like you cannot question them in any form, even though the beginning of the government was basically that you should have the right to question your government, and it's the citizens' like duty to question the government. Oh my God, I said duty, guys. I know, shut up. But it's weird to me that this is the place that we've come to. And it's funny that you mentioned Iran as well, because a lot of times I make the comparison that the US and Iran's are actually very similar in a lot of ways that they handle certain things. And I think that's kind of like why they're enemies, is because they're actually really, really similar in so many aspects. And you know how opposites kind of attract, but it's kind of the same thing. I think that's it is a weird thing culturally speaking. But there's a lot going on though. So like tonight, for example, I don't know if you heard, but Andrew Tate got arrested. Do you know who Andrew Tate is?
Yeah, I know him. Oh yeah. Sort of loosely friends with him from years ago. I used to hang out in D.C. with Mike Cernovich and a bunch of us when CPAC was going on. And so almost did some business deal with him involving political betting that's more easily available in Romania, in Europe, than it is in the United States. Ultimately, that didn't work out. But it's unclear the full story, because my understanding is that they often arrest people for the purposes of simply detaining them in an investigation, that there's actually no criminal charges that have yet been brought against either Tate brother, that instead they're being brought in for questioning. My understanding is this relates to a case that arose about a year ago, where people who investigated it found it was not meritorious. So I think that there's a lot of people, like this right here, I think is unlikely to be true.
This is an insane headline by an insane website. By the way, the Daily Beast are a bunch of idiots. And this is the kind of headline that you would see, of course, on the Daily Beast, but literally like makes no sense because of what you're just saying. Like there hasn't
completely.
been any charges or anything.
My understanding is it's relatively known that the Tate brothers are involved in the webcam business in Eastern Europe and have been for some years. I don't know whether they still are or what the status of that is, but so the webcam business can be a problematic industry involving human trafficking. But my understanding is they were very, very careful about who it was that was working for them, and that they don't have any of those connections or problems that people just kind of assume they do, due to they just say Eastern European webcam business. Okay, probably it's a bunch of folks from the movie Taken. I don't think that's accurate in their case. I think what the evidence will ultimately show is You may like or dislike their industry, but that they were obeying the law in all respects is my strong hunch. Now, he's become much high profile politically, been very critical of the Ukrainian war, and the timing of this investigation, renewed investigation and arrest, raises big questions because Romania has its own political aspirations in Ukraine. It would like to take some Ukrainian territory back, as it sees it, to Romania, including Moldova, which has a whole portion of it called Transnistria that I still aligns itself with Russia. It doesn't align itself with Moldova. So all of that, the Romanians would like to take back, plus some other regions where there's actually some Romanian population inside Ukraine between Moldova and Romania. So here you have a very high profile, or becoming a very high profile critic of the war, saying people shouldn't go volunteer or draft for the war. Don't go in the military. It's a sucker's bet. Don't get involved in Ukraine. It's a disaster waiting to happen. So he was taking a position directly opposed by the European Union and the Romanian government.
He's not wrong.
No, I agree.
I don't think he's wrong on any of that. Any of that.
Agreed. And so that's why I find these allegations, their timing, very suspect. Very suspect. Again, I'm not, I always agree with Andrew Tate. I myself would not run a webcam business, but his business. But to my knowledge, he's always abided by the law. Was very careful to abide by the law. So I suspect these allegations against him are false.
That's fascinating because, okay, so from my end, I actually didn't really know who he was at all until a few months ago when he
That's
first
most
kind of,
people.
when he first kind of like went into the news about being arrested or whatever, and I was like, I don't know who this guy is, and I started kind of like looking into him, and there's a lot of stuff he says that I don't agree with, but there's a lot of stuff he says that I do agree with. So I was like, this is interesting. But one of the main things that he's kind of known for as being, like this article is saying, is a misogynist influencer, which I think is freaking ridiculous. I mean, like everyone and their mom now is a misogynist in some way, shape, or form, including myself, who is an internalized misogynist, because apparently just wanting men to be men and women to be women is wrong or somehow misogynistic now. So I can't take anyone's word in the media seriously anymore whenever they come out with these kind of headlines. And I'm like, well, it seems like this guy's definitely, like, there's always something fishy about all of these headlines to me. I'm just like, okay. And so now, and I find it really funny that I'm like, do you know who Andrew Tate is? And you're like, yeah, I know him. I'm like, we used to hang out. Like, it's all good. Kind of reminds me of Larry King. I don't know if you've ever watched some of his interviews when he would like somebody would ask, like he interviewed, I forget the lady's name, but she's Shirley from Community, and she was like, yeah, I really love like Martin Luther King Jr. and blah blah blah, and he was like, oh yeah, I knew him. I sat down and interviewed him a long time ago. So it just reminds me of like that kind of thing when I'm like talking to you and you're like, oh yeah, I knew this guy. So he's a great guy. But it's interesting because obviously you come from a place of knowing who he is and like knowing him personally, having deals with him. Have you ever had a discussion with him in terms of some of his political views or like his misogynistic point of views of what he's all about? Like, can you kind of expand on that a little bit to his character?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, sort of a certain kind of male perspective on dating. And I don't see it as anti-woman. I see it as just a distinctive male perspective on dating that's not shared by all men, not shared by all women. Some have criticisms of it because they think it elevates men over women. But I don't think that's what he's trying to do at all.
No.
He sees it as, here's how you find a proper balance in a relationship, in society and in intimate relationships between men and women. And he thinks this is what works. He thinks this is what achieves what both men and women want. This is what he believes. I don't share all of his beliefs, but it's clear to me he's not coming from a malevolent, anti-woman, woman-hating, women's subordination, or anything like that. He is sincerely thinking this is what makes men and women happy, and preaching accordingly, and teaching accordingly. And he had groups of support. And I know there's people out there that don't like any of those kind of groups. They see a lot of them as men's rights groups, or they see male dating advice as sort of a lot of machismo nonsense, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of people who have benefited from that over the years that I've known. I mean, that's some people, they need to have a certain guidance, a certain approach that works better for them than what has worked for them in the past. I know we were on, I think this was after you were off the air, but on Raketa's birthday
Yeah,
show.
I went. I left that show after I sang my beautiful song, and all hell broke loose. I watched I watched a little bit of it, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is a crazy stream." After I left, but yeah, like that was a whole discussion about it, like the whole Tinder dating scene, what it's like, what it's like for different types of men, especially because I mean Camelot is a very different type of person than Kurt is, and the responses that you get is totally different. I mean, I've been married for like 20 years, Robert, so I definitely am not in that scene at all. Like, I'm very happy that I'm not in that scene. Like, God, I cannot even imagine being in that dating scene right now. I feel really bad for all the single people out there. Shout out to you guys. But it's just I find it really interesting when they're always trying to label people, right? Like one of the biggest labels is obviously conspiracy theorists, which I've gotten a lot of. Like, I've always been labeled a conspiracy theorist, and now I wear it as a badge of honor, because it used to be like, oh, like don't call me that. But now I'm like, yes, I'm very fine with knowing that I'm going to be proven right at some point in the future, because a lot of the stuff that the conspiracy theorists have been talking about has come true, as we've seen with what's going on with the Twitter files. And of course, even Alex Jones, and how like Alex Jones was right about so many different things. Now with this, it's the same thing. Like, I'm like, I try to take everyone, first of all, with a grain of salt, because not everybody's correct about everything. And second of all, I would like to know who this person is before, like, if the media, especially if the leftist media especially, is trying to tell me that this guy is a misogynist influencer and like blah blah blah, I'm like, there's probably something more to this. And so I kind of like start digging into it more. So I find your views really fascinating about it, because it's kind of like aligned with my own in that sense. But this is also really fascinating and on its own. So what do you think is going to happen now? Because like you said, I don't think he's been formally charged, but if he does get charged in Romania, like what is that exact? How is that going to work out? Like, is he going to have to be extradited or not extradited, but how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, he would be tried in Romania under the Romanian legal system, and so the question is, what is the Romanian government up to?
Right.
Was this to send a message? Is there some corruption behind the scenes? Is this a shakedown? Is this an intimidation effort? Is this to take him off the playing board? I had always said, and had told him in the past, I don't have confidence in any European government. So any client I've had that's been like, if I had a client that was in SBF's position at FTX, I would not have recommended the Bahamas to be the place to be.
Sure.
Not the United States, nowhere else. So I think now I don't know how Romanian criminal law handles it. How much do they release him? Right now, my understanding is it's just an investigation. So does it result in actual criminal charges? Does he get bail? I don't know if you get a jury trial, right, in Romania.
Right. That's what I'm wondering. I don't think they do. And I think Romania is, from what I understand, and I mean, like, no offense to anyone who's already out of the chat, but I've heard that Romania is one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, and including, like, I mean, as well as Ukraine. So it makes sense what you're talking about with the connection of, how they're fighting. It's kind of like turf wars, a little bit like in Mexico when they have the cartels going off. But it's weird that this is happening. The timing of it is definitely very weird and suspect. So I agree with you on that.
Completely. I mean, it's to credit to Tate in a sense. he has been able to influence the court of public opinion to the degree he drew their attention.
Yes.
You don't always want to do that when it can have this consequence, but it is, the quite extraordinary that he went from someone some of us knew to someone many in the social media space knew almost overnight. And that was the achievement of his ability to sort of hack the social media systems, if you will, in a lawful way. And I know his brother too, pretty nice guy. My experience again with both of them is that they're stand-up, loyal, straightforward guys who are not involved in any kind of this kind of criminal behavior whatsoever.
Well, it's crazy though. Why do you think that because I mean, I think he makes a lot of money, like doing what he
Yes,
does
he
in
does.
terms of the whole manosphere situation. But
Yep.
like, why would he be into the cam girls thing? Like that's weird.
Extremely lucrative.
It's just more money. Like he just wants.
Yeah, like I mean, if those dating services and webcam services that set up, particularly in Eastern Central Europe, made tons of cash. Tons of cash. I mean, much of the early internet payment processing and the rest was all based on the porn
Sure.
industry. So I
Yeah.
represented somebody in the tax context that was one of the people that was the founders of payment processing. And the way they would compete with each other is they would create these religious front organizations and sue each other for doing morally bad stuff. When
Oh
they were
my God.
they were both doing the same thing. I mean, it's like, okay, whatever. I just represent them on the tax charges, which were kind of bogus. And luckily, what got them out of trouble was they actually owed Canadian tax under the circumstances, and that's actually a defense to U.S. tax charges. So
Oh my
they ended up
God.
getting out of it altogether. And that reminds me of Larry King, same dynamic. The Larry King, two fascinating things about King. One is he was the most difficult person to order for in the history of humanity. I mean, I never knew that there were so many things on a salad you couldn't eat until
Oh my
Larry King.
God.
So I ran an intern service in D.C. It was the Yale Political Union's Washington, D.C. summer version. There's still old C-SPAN videos of me hosting a couple of them. We were featured in Bob Woodward's book and a bunch of stuff. This was back in 93, 94, or the summer of 1993. And so we had Larry King speak. And so the first thing was his assistant told me, here's the salad that he wants, but here's all the things that can't be on it. And it's like 18 things. I was like, holy moly. The second thing is, apparently Larry misunderstood my role. So I was putting together interns with interesting speakers. So we spoke, George Stephanopoulos at the White House, James Woolsey, the CIA director at Langley, Senator Danforth, Senator Kerry, a couple more senators thrown in there. Then people like Larry King, people like Paul Begala, a bunch of people. And so what I just organized all the interns in town under the umbrella of the Yale Political Union. And after Larry spoke, I said, thanks. We want to chat with him a bit. He had fascinating history, tons of stories because he was radio before he was TV and all that. All the crazy, context of, like you mentioned, of people he'd interviewed. But he didn't want to talk about any of that after it was just me and him walking him back to his car or whatever it was. And I think he's driver. All he wanted me to get the phone number of a blonde that was there. And I was like, dude, one, you're married, so why are you asking me for anything? Two, I'm not a pimp. I'm an organizer of interns. I don't know what you're used to in DC, but I'm not part of that world, bro. I was like, oh my! I couldn't even get him off, and he just kept coming back. He was like, come on, you get her, look, you get her phone number for me. Come on.
What a knack. That's hilarious.
Yes, welcome to Washington, D.C., Larry King style. It was a little introduction to the real. There's a reason why D.C. has one of the highest rates of disappeared people and kids and things of this nature. It is a sick town.
That's awful. But it's so funny that I brought up Larry King, and then you're like, yeah, I met him.
Yeah, you got a Larry King story. I got a little bit of every story.
That's amazing. Oh my God, that's amazing. Real quick, let me get this massive super chat. Thank you so much, Jay Schwabach, for 101.27. Nina and Barnes on the stream. Wow, I won't need my Viagra tonight. Oh my, my body are very stimulated. Please have Barnes get you a locals account so I don't have to give money to Mama Susan. P.S. I wish you had Az here for this. Hail FNT and you. Well, thank you so much. And he followed it up with, I meant my body and mind are very stimulated tonight. I got what you meant. Thank you so much. Az is great. I don't know if he's awake or asleep. I know he's playing The Witcher all the time
He
now.
lives in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, he's a New Zealander. No, but seriously, he's in the UK. But we just make fun of him for that. We just make fun of him as a New Zealander. But yeah, thank you so much, Jay Schwab.
Oh, yeah. So it's probably like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. over there.
Yeah,
right now?
I think so. Yeah. This is a sick world, Jane Theory. It really, really is. And it's sometimes it gets a little bit annoying. But that's why, Robert, I do a show on Fridays to balance out this crazy show where I talk about all the crazy, clown world stuff. I talk about good things. It's called Infinite Hope. I try to balance out the world and show people cute animal videos and just, have some mental sanity with everything. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with the Andrew Tate thing. That's going to be really interesting to watch and see what happens. Do you think we're going to get something like really soon, like probably tomorrow, about what charges were laid or what?
My understanding of Romanian protocol is they hold him for 24 hours to interrogate him, and then almost always release him because, again, to my knowledge, the media is going to play with a headline arrested. Doesn't mean the same thing in a lot of other countries. In a lot of other countries, it's like being subpoenaed to come down and talk to the police.
To just questioning or whatever. Because even when I was watching the video, like he wasn't even handcuffed. So I mean, if it was being really arrested for rape, you would think that.
Oh yeah, I think that story is going to turn out to be false. And if it does, I mean, I'll be curious what their factual predicate was. Because otherwise, that Daily Beast opened itself up to another suit. I mean, they become. It's amazing how it started actually under my friend John Avlon. I knew him as Phip Avlon from Yale, who's now at CNN, but he was the editor at Daily Beast during the early parts of the Trump era. And it was under him who has preached, being centrist and not being too woke and not being too political, et cetera. And he just let the Daily Beast become, he ended up blocking me on Facebook because he was so mad I pointed it out. But it was like, dude, your publication has just become a leftist hack organization. I was like, only people in Fantasyland. He was still in Fantasyland, and he was still in the center. It's like, maybe you're in the center of Manhattan politically, but you're not in the center of America anymore. And, he's the guy who worked for Mayor Bloomberg, worked for Mayor Rudy Giuliani, was part of Giuliani's 2008 presidential campaign, and a sweetheart of a human being. But he let the Daily Beast go nuts. And then he's at CNN, and now he just puts out leftist nonsense all the time. Just kind of pitiful. He's just totally gone down. He thinks he hasn't changed, and he thinks the rest of the world has gone crazy Trumpish. Rather than recognizing, he doesn't realize
the TDS. Like the TDS gets everybody, man. Like it's crazy how. And it like seeps into the soul and the mind. It's like a cancer. This is the video that I saw of him being arrested. See, I thought he wasn't cuffed, but some people in the chat are saying he was. But when I watched it,
the way he sits in the back of the vehicle makes it look like he's not cuffed.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah,
because his hands were like in his pocket too.
Yeah, see, I think his hands in his pocket right there, so he's not cuffed.
Because then,
and again, I think now, and the fact they had what's also weird is that they had the whole media out there. So again, this is just my understanding. There's no criminal charges brought. He's only being arrested for purposes of. He's really just being asked to come down to the police station. In America, they can't force you to do that. In America, you can say Fifth Amendment. They can't arrest you for the purposes of questioning. For the most part, there are certain material witness exceptions and things like that. But as a general rule, they can't arrest you for purposes of questioning you. But Romania, I'm sure, does not have those same restrictions. But having the media out there, it makes it very political, as far as I can tell. And, reality is if you're in the webcam business, you're in a high risk business, I think, in terms of people being able to make up charges and make up accusations and things of that nature. So like with dealing with Joe Francis, 90% of the stuff people believed about him are totally false. Now, there was some stuff that he deserved consequences for, but but 90% of what people thought, like, I mean, for example, the girl, like, the idea was that he was getting all these girls drunk and they didn't know any better. I had to watch the background videos of those tapes to see what was happening. And this is like hours of backgrounds before the actual Girls Gone Wild shots are taken. The girls are all competing to get on there. These are all would-be models who want to be famous, who want to get their big break. They're not these vulnerable. Now, he marketed it like it's vulnerable, innocent sweethearts who get a little drunk and you get them to do crazy stuff. It was actually, let's just say not that profile of person. It was someone that if you dug into their background, not exactly church-going story. And instead they just wanted to break into the industry. Some wanted to explicitly break into the porn industry.
Wow.
And so that's what was really going on. But when you're in that industry, you subject yourself to a range of risks. Now, Joe Francis is a horrible human being, so not comparing Tate to him at all. But yeah, I think that I mean, it's also interesting. It reminds me of the old Edwin Edwards quote, great governor of the great state of Louisiana, who once said the only way he was going to get into trouble, because they indicted him 4 times federally before they were ever able to convict on anything, was, he said, if they caught him in bed with a dead girl or a live boy. But what's interesting is about the sort of because he was saying that's where they go. They go with a sex scandalous kind of thing. And how did they target Julian Assange? They falsely accused him of rape. I still get people who like, oh, he's a rapist. And it's like, don't you realize that the only allegation is whether he properly used a condom? And it's like, if proper use of birth control is now sexual assault, there's going to be a lot of men that have claims. There's probably going to be half of the NBA players that have claims.
No kidding.
There's a lot of baby daddies running around. Baby
a lot of
mamas
man traps going on. Yeah,
absolutely. Who said, hey, don't worry, honey, I'm on the pill, and surprise, surprise, somebody's going to be paying 21% for the next 18 years.
Yeah, a lot of women poking holes in the condoms and everything too. I mean, it's gross, like what some of these women do to get these men.
We've never thought of that as equal to sexual assault.
No.
So the maybe basic battery, maybe, but the idea that it's sexual assault struck me as kind of insane. Because also it suggests that any form of interaction that's any way different in physical interaction than expectation can now be rape. And it's like, that's opening a very dangerous door. And it's a door that could go either way, gender-wise.
It was too. Like, I mean, the whole Me Too thing, right? Like was kind of opening that door of, I mean, you can ask any dude now, like a lot of dudes probably want to get, forms signed, consent forms signed because they don't want that to come back and haunt them later on. I mean, it was a joke on Curb Your Enthusiasm for a while, but I mean, it's true now. Like, it's like,
well, and if you look at like Girls Gone Wild, they managed to challenge those. All those girls had all signed one-page consent forms, and they contested those. And so even though there was background footage to show that at the time they signed that consent form, there was nothing intoxication or anything else. And so legally they were really in the clear, and they knew that, so they made up allegations. The venue shopped for selective forums with judges who had daughters in the same age range. So as a lot of the girls on Girls Gone Wild, so he was eager to whack Joe Francis, etc. But I think whatever's going on with it, I find it highly suspicious, the timing of the investigation into the Tate brothers, given that they've been operating for, I think, the better part of a decade without any problems. I mean, Tate's father, of course, was one of the famous I think it's his father, maybe his grandfather, was one of the great black chess players. I mean, he was famous for being like the first great known black American chess player, one of the top 10 in the world. So, I mean, he has sort of a high end. That's why when he talks, you can tell he has a high end vocabulary, very sharp guy, and the rest. I just don't see these allegations as likely true. Question is, can he get impartial justice in Romania?
Yeah, I mean, that's concerning. There's a lot of people that are talking about how, I mean, people might get paid off there. Like a lot of people are saying like he's probably
Oh,
gonna
yes.
walk tomorrow. Like it's not. I mean, it's funny what's going on Twitter about him because there's a lot of people who love him, obviously, and are like, no, this is all bullshit. Like, there's no way this is true. And then there's a lot of people who absolutely hate him and are like, no, this guy is a fucking like, rapist, sexual predator, and like all this stuff. And it's like, it's very heated. It's very, very heated, and it's interesting. Let me see what this article is saying here because I haven't read it actually. Like I just saw it I wanted to see what the New York Post was saying because it's kind of like a little bit more right leaning than the
Yep. It's
leftist
it's
crowd.
a Murdoch publication, so you'll get a little bit better view. With the only caveat being, Murdoch is very pro-Ukraine war, and Tate's been a high-profile critic of it.
Ah, that's interesting. They were also really like pro Amber Heard at the
Yes,
time because of that
yes,
whole thing. But
yep.
this is
Because
interesting.
Fox had a big, real Me Too problem.
Yeah, you remember that? Yeah, man, like that was insane. And okay, so the social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother busted in Romania Thursday related to sex trafficking allegations. According to a report, police in tactical gear descended on a villa Andrew Tate and his brother were staying at Thursday to detain the British brothers on kidnapping and rape charges. Judicial sources told Romanian outlet whatever it's called.
So that's what they're like. But like that is to my knowledge, they're just inquiring about what their alleged role in trafficking people or a trafficking case, but not that they have been charged with anything.
Mm.
That's my understanding.
He
And that's
is cuffed
Romanian
in this.
procedure.
So he was cuffed at
But
some
that's
point.
what's weird is that's like a second shot.
I know.
And that doesn't look like the same jacket.
Doesn't it?
I guess to me, I'd like, doesn't that look like a leather jacket? And I thought that he had something else on before.
In the other video? Okay, we'll
In the
go
other
back to
video.
that for a second. I thought it was the same thing. There's his brother. I mean, his brother is there too.
Mm-hmm.
There's another shot there. Okay, I don't know what that is. Oh, this is like the police center or something. Okay. Police said that the Tates allegedly formed an organized crime group and sexually exploited women by forcing them to perform pornographic demonstrations, pornographic for the purpose of producing and disseminating through social media platforms. Forcing them? I don't know if
what that really is that they're just saying the webcam business was coercion, and that's the problem with being in that business. That's the risk you face, is how do you prevent an allegation like that? But I've heard of no evidence to support that. So, but the problem is, if you're in Romania, the Romanian government, you can go twist some arms of the women that are in the webcam business, and they'll tell you, and they'll say what the government tells them to say.
Right. They'll get paid like probably way more than they ever were with the webcam.
And if you're Romanian, you're not that distant from remembering people just disappearing for a long time. If you were in the wrong side of the government, you vanished. And so that was a particular problem in Romania. So that's their risk, is that basically they're outsiders who have been politically targeted, who they can probably fabricate evidence against.
Yeah, this is weird to me because, I mean, again, like, I don't know. I'm sure some of the women, I'm sure I at some point get exploited or something, but forcing them to perform pornographic demonstration, I don't know about this because, well, I mean, it's Andrew Tate. I think women are probably just like throwing themselves at him anyway. I just don't see
Well,
the whole
and
forcing
usually
thing.
the way the industry works, the women make the most money. So the other thing here is, usually in that industry in places like Eastern Europe, they're all Romanian women, right? I mean, normally the way true human trafficking works, they have control of a passport because the person's not from that country. That person doesn't know how to work the legal system to try to get relief or remedy. There's some degree of real coercive psychological control. It's kind of like the Nixium case,
Right.
which is, where exactly is the boundary? and the courts are starting to liberalize that boundary in ways that could be sketchy in the future. Because I think the NXIVM case, they had a legitimate, straightforward case because there was clear blackmail and extortion going on. But they wanted to expand it and say that the definition of sex trafficking included things that was like, there's almost nothing coercive in that. And it's like, okay, it's similar to like the Julian Assange allegations. It's like, if we start liberalizing these laws to where any relationship dispute suddenly can become criminal, then we've got a problem. And so I think long term, and so that I think that's kind of the issue here, is that everything about this sounds made up politically. Again, they've been running this business for a decade. No problems, no questions, no complaints.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden this guy starts questioning like
that. Yeah, all the women really are captured. I mean, again, they know about what the Tates do. They know who the women are. It's not like the Tates hiding any of this. They know who the so it's like, if you were secretly coercing these women, would you be putting your own face out there that, hey, this webcam is my project, my company,
that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no way that these women, first of all, they would have come out way sooner because this guy's really high profile, and they would have probably Me Too'd him under the Me Too banner like long time ago if he's been doing it for that long, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's weird.
It was like the allegations against Trump. It was like, hold on a second. Just now, a guy's been famous and rich for 40 years. Suddenly, he has a history of. I was like, I'm not buying that for a second.
Yeah. It's all very just convenient, especially like right after Zelensky announced that he's going to meet with the World Economic Forum like next week, and it's like, oh really, what a freaking shocker that is. Like, wow, okay. And then all of a sudden this guy who's been talking about the whole Ukraine thing being an idiotic war or whatever, all of a sudden this guy is just arrested and under these charges. It's just all very convenient. Now, I'm not saying that none of this is gonna pan out, or maybe he is, for all I know. I don't know, but I'm talking to you and you seem to know him, and
none of it makes sense.
It stinks. It doesn't make sense.
So
the
allegations are just deeply problematic, but it's the world we live in. Once they could go after Julian Assange, all bets were off. It meant any dissident, or Ed Snowden, most famous whistleblower in the world, hiding out in Russia, most famous broadcaster and publisher of whistleblower information, is in a British prison cell, and has been effectively locked up for the better part of a decade. Once you're in that kind of world, where almost nobody is second guessing what's taking place, you have Zelensky praised as the great human rights Democratic advocate. And what has he done in the last year? Banned his political opposition, banned his opposing press, banned the leading religious organization and from people from even going to church, locked up any key dissidents or political opponents and bragged about it, and had neo-Nazi aligned units torture people, broadcast it, and get away with it. And this is the guy we're promoting. We're promoting one of the worst totalitarians in the world alive today, and that's Vladimir Zelensky. And yet he's Person of the Year for Time magazine. Well, Andrew Tate is going to go to jail.
It's almost it almost sounded like you were describing Justin Trudeau, except for like the Nazi part. But I mean, he would have done that too if he could.
Do you think Justin Trudeau is really Fidel Castro's son?
I've had like really long thoughts about this, and there's good cases to be made about it. I don't know. But I think so. I think he might be. I think
he looks like him.
He does really look like him.
And Castro was famous for all the little Castros running around Cuba.
This is the little,
the little Fidelitos, as he put it. He said, I think he told a journalist, who knows how many little Fidelitos are running around Havana.
I believe it. I believe it.
And then, Mama Trudeau, she was like some of those people in those Girls Gone Wild video. Put it that way.
Yeah, she definitely gets there's rumors about her for sure. Now I'm going to bring this up real quick because, well, as you know, like I've explained to you that I'm Canadian and I live in Mexico and I love Viva. But the other day I saw him tweet something that kind of triggered me. Like, I was like, okay, I'm kind of triggered here. Like, what's going on with Viva? I love you, but what? And this is the tweet. So I
He's
wanted
having
to
a lot
get,
of fun on Twitter.
I know. And I was like, he tweets like a 16-year-old girl. Like, he's just tweeting like left, right, and center. It's great. So I see this tweet and he says, so he's responding to this guy, Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, the soon-to-be ex-congressman from Illinois.
Right. And this guy was replying to Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about how President Trump is right. We should bomb the cartels because they are an international criminal organization burning our people by lacing deadly fentanyl from China and drugs they illegally sell across our borders, the United States, not Mexico or its great people, the cartels. Even though, well, the cartels are Mexico and the people will be completely in the line of fire, but so this guy came back and he's like, this is the kind of tweet you get when you put a morally vacant performance artist in Congress. Attacking Mexico probably isn't the best solution. How do you bomb cartels anyway, like the cartels trading camps or the cartel bases? And then Viva came with, this is the kind of tweet you get when you put a morally vacant performance artist in Congress. Hashtag confession thought protection. Also, if cartels can figure out how to bomb rival cartels, I'm sure American intelligence can figure it out. This was the part that I was a little bit kind of shocked about reading from Viva, because I kind of thought that Viva would know how insanely corrupt the United States government is with regards to the drug trade in Mexico and how involved the CIA, the FBI, and all of those entities are when it comes to the drug trade in Mexico. So I was a little bit just kind of like taken aback by this response, because then he like follows it up with this New York Post thing saying, Mexico's deadliest cartels dropping bombs from drones onto rival camps in the new turf war. And look, I just, because I live here, I've accepted the risk that there's a cartel here. The cartel is like is really the government of Mexico. Is two sides, right? It's just, one is the cartel and the other is actually the government. And they're very much hand in hand with, like I said, with what's going on with the United States. They know a lot of the stuff that is going on here, they know about. So I just wanted to get your take on here, on your, like, am I misunderstanding what Viva is talking about? What's your take on this issue?
So, I mean, I think his criticism of Kinzinger is well placed in the sense that what Kinzinger is claiming is the idea that you couldn't wage war against the cartels or the rest. You definitely could if you so desired. So I think from that perspective, I get where Trump was coming from. I mean, he's decided to take a very aggressive posture on issues related to the cartels, on issues related to drug dealing. He's talking about death penalty for drug dealers. I don't happen to share that particular perspective, a policy perspective, but I think both will be popular. I think people so politically that they will support it in America due to the not only the fentanyl problem, but just the inability to get a control over the drug problem. But I agree that that the biggest key to the drug problem in the United States is U.S. complicity with the cartels. And indeed, in my view, the Mexican drug cartels only exist because of the U.S. government. And so this Narcos gets a little bit at this. It gets right at the top of it between its Colombian and Mexican series. There's the DEA agent series that disclosed that the DEA agent that was killed in Mexico was likely killed at the insistence of the CIA and with the complicity of high-ranking DEA officers. And but though I don't think Viva's that red-pilled on any of that. But I mean, I had a theory years ago. I was approached by some of the old Chicago outfit boys when they were suddenly under federal investigation. These are the guys portrayed in the movie Casino and places like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were wondering, why are we suddenly under investigation? And I wasn't going to represent them, but I had a political theory that I shared with some folks at a piano bar, and happened to be the operator of the piano bar was backed by some of those boys. And so they reached out to me and said, well, you write a memo on this. We'd like to see what this is worth, if you don't mind. And I said, fine. I wasn't going to, say no.
Sure.
Memo's good. They don't have to represent anybody. It doesn't, but I laid out what I thought was going to happen and what was happening. And that, it was an extensive memo, but basically I said, you guys are likely to continue to get targeted because they want to take you out. And that means they've already got somebody to replace you. And that's why they need to take you out. And my hunch was that they had cut a deal with the Sinaloa Cartel and El Chapo, and that they were going to give him Chicago. And the best way to give him Chicago was to move out the old boys, the old crew, the original Chicago outfit. And in fact, not only did I was right about all those guys getting prosecuted, all of them did. Even a lot of them were really old by that point. But it did remove the last vestige of old school, or what I always say is tell people, if you don't like organized crime, how much are you going to like disorganized crime? Certain crime is always going to exist. It's where I actually don't fully disagree with Hoover, even though I think Hoover had his own ulterior motivations for it. But Hoover had the same premise. He thought the world would have less crime if organized crime was strong than if it was weak.
Wow.
Now, he also wanted to go into business with organized crime, and organized crime was helping him out on a whole bunch of other things, and they had blackmail on him, and there's all that too. But he wasn't fundamentally wrong. It's like you take out organized, you can deal with organized crime to mitigate collateral violence, to mitigate how it spreads, to keep certain criminal activity off the table. Sure. Once you remove those guys, you're going to get chaos. And what you're going to get is some of the most brutal, vicious criminals in the world, because that's who's going to win out in the battle. And of course, what happened is those outfit guys did all get prosecuted. The Sinaloa Cartel basically took over south side of Chicago, and violence skyrocketed in the south side of Chicago because the gangs were now competing for the delivery routes for the Sinaloa Cartel. And that was, and you could see it coming. I mean, I represented a couple of guys. I represented their wives on tax issues, but they were in what you might call the alternative product distribution business. The
alternative products.
Exactly. It's state unapproved product distribution business. But these guys from Pittsburgh to Oakland ran a clean shop, right? They had very little collateral violence. I was there just to represent their wives on the tax charges. All the tax charges went away. They got a deal done. I was out of the case. I wasn't there to represent them on any drug charges. But when they got removed, violence went up threefold in Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Like, I even try to argue this to some of the officials involved, the IRS and DEA officials. I even joked with one of them because the lead agent was the same guy who had taken out the Pittsburgh mob a few years before. And I was like, hey, the first time I met him, I was like, you're the reason why I can't get any good Italian food anymore in Pittsburgh. And he laughed and he said, yeah. But of course, I was like, you know what you're going to do when all this is said and done? You're going to take out these guys. And you're going to get worse drug distribution. You're going to get worse collateral crime. You're going to get worse people running the show, because these guys run a minimal violence show. They keep violence to a minimum. You replace them with somebody, they're going to be worse. And they were. And it's like, what exactly are we achieving? It's where I disagree with my conservative friends on the drug war. It's like we're achieving absolutely zilch. All we're doing is helping enrich gangs, helping enrich cartels, helping enrich intelligence agencies, helping enrich corrupt actors. Because these smugglers then smuggle humans and everything else included.
Yep.
And it's like if we did not have this drug war, we don't have a fentanyl problem. If we didn't have this, drug war, we don't have the scale of human smuggling problem that we have. And so I think that it's full. All the drug war does is enrich and empower the state. It does not protect kids. It does not protect citizens. It's where I disagree with Marjorie Taylor Greene and President Trump.
I'm like, we're so on the same page, because this is the kind of stuff that I have to kind of be aware of as well, because I live down here. And so one of the things I always make fun of that too, and it's funny that you bring up Chicago, because a lot of people in the US are, in Canada, when they hear like I live in Mexico, they're all like, "Oh my God, like the cartels." And I'm like, the crime rate in Chicago is a lot higher than where I live on a daily basis. And it's funny because whenever there's cartel crime here, it's always very organized. Like you barely ever get like just random people getting killed. They're always almost always, like 90% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, they are somehow connected to the cartel and are somehow
Yep.
involved, and therefore they're getting killed for whatever reason. And it's really crazy in that sense. And that's why I'm like, Viva needs to get like red pilled on this, because I feel like he was like he
Well, I think that's maybe almost the ultimate red pill. Like for some people, it's the assassination of the president. For some people, it's the corruption of our legal system. But I think the idea that governments are neck deep involved in drug distribution, that this
yes.
goes way back, that it's not a coincidence. The reality is, how do you control dissident populations? And in America,
Right.
you have two big dissident populations: poor and working class whites, particularly from the South and Appalachia, in old coal mining and old manufacturing country, and the other African Americans in urban centers. These are two groups whose experience with the American government has led them to be skeptical of what the government is up to distrust them, to have their own narrative that their parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles share around the Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. And so if you're the system, you need to control those populations. You need to do two things. You need to make sure the rest of the world is scared of those populations, not to listen to them, not interact with them, not trust them, not engage them. And secondly, you need to destroy their leadership from within. And one is to buy off their leadership. They're, give them, it's my what happened if Nat Turner got a scholarship to Harvard? Well, there's no famous slave revolt, right? So part of it is buying off the elites within that group. So to co-opt them. And to the degree that doesn't work is to corrupt them, create an enterprise that weakens their community, that weakens the moral fiber of their community, this economic backbone of their community, the natural leadership, their natural dissident leadership of that community. And who does the dissident leadership become? They become gang leaders. They become major drug dealers. And so they create those opportunities deliberately because they want to. It's not a coincidence that we had a crack epidemic targeting urban Black America. It's not a coincidence we had a meth targeting poor working class Appalachia. I mean, does anybody doubt? It's like, why is it overwhelmingly there and not in Beverly Hills? Why is it overwhelmingly there and not in Manhattan? Probably not a coincidence that that's happening.
Absolutely. And it's crazy because especially in Mexico too, it's like there's an old saying that goes like, when you outlaw freedom, only the outlaw will be free. And in Mexico, it's very much the same way, because a lot of the cartels that are active are young people who are sick and tired of what the government has become and how corrupt the government is. So they end up actually joining the cartel in order to be able to live freely. And a lot of the times the cartel here actually helps people. They're literally organized groups that help the poor people. They create schools, they create funding. This is why Mexico, the cartels are the actual second government in Mexico, because they're the ones that are actually paving roads, and they're doing a lot of weird stuff that are actually helpful to their local communities, which is really strange to think about. And it's also
kind of an old tradition. And it was like the really good old organized crime folks took care of their local community. So going all the way back to Sicily, the Italians did, like some of the safest neighborhoods in America in the 1920s were mob neighborhoods, because they're places nobody was going to screw around with.
Take care of the family.
Exactly.
You gotta take care of the family. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Pablo started out that way. I mean, he went a little crazy because they changed the extradition rules on him and the rest, and then he went on a violent scourge. And most of his money is still gone. No one knows. He buried it so many different places in the jungle. Nobody knows where it is. So it's one of the last great treasures is Pablo Escobar's cocaine money treasure. But the other thing that the real reason is he most likely decided not to agree to continue to work with U.S. intelligence. And so they shifted to the other brothers up in the other part of Colombia, and decided that's why they were going to replace Pablo Escobar made him enemy number one. Now, some of
Mhm.
that was because the Colombians were crazy and killing everybody in Miami.
Sure,
And
yeah.
they're way too violent. But a large part of it was just due to the fact that Escobar had a historic leftist bias, but on the
Mhm.
leftist populist side, to a degree you could pin him down politically, but built tons of housing, schools, free
Yep.
soccer fields, medical facilities, you
Yep.
name it. He
Yep.
was doing things the government was not doing in Colombia.
Yep. They
And
do that
then,
here. They do that here all the
yeah,
time, and that's why you don't get that revolt because they're keeping the people somewhat happy and like
right.
compliant, and
Yeah.
everyone's okay.
It's
And
not as fear driven as people assume. I mean, I think
it's
that
not.
there's segments of it, but not that's been my experience as well. I mean, I was down in Bucerias on the other side of the Mexican coast
Mhm.
from Cancun. Beautiful little town. A lot of Canadians actually go down and visit there, a little surfer town. But it's at the southern end of Sonora cartel country. And it was fascinating flying in because you could see what was obvious. Like
Mhm.
this had to be a drug distribution or production
Sure.
facility because it'd
Sure.
be in the jungle by itself, nothing
Prides up.
else,
Yeah.
no
Mhm.
apparent roads. Then it's
Mhm.
like, wow, okay, it's right there. But you talk to people. I mean, there's the whole Sonola history. The Sonolan history is very comparable to East Tennessee.
Mhm.
They're an old fish. They're a fishing community. They're both fishing and mountainous community. Great seafood actually comes from Sonola.
Mhm.
You can still get. I had some great soup the other day. That was fantastic. That was at a local Sonolan restaurant in Vegas, of all places.
Yum.
But their history was of being just independent, kind of piratey.
Mhm.
They're like the Chechens of the Caucasus, or like the Cossacks, and they're just an independent group that goes back centuries. And
Mhm.
first they grew marijuana, and then we went in and we burned all their marijuana plants. We
Mhm.
forced them, and we did so deliberately because what we wanted to transition the drug trade from Colombia, where we didn't trust either side, because of the connections to FARC and because of the other issues there. We wanted to shift it to Mexico, where we had deep alliances, where we were also going to use NAFTA to be able to create easy corporate jobs for U.S. companies making cheap goods that was going to
Mhm.
gut American labor.
Mhm.
All that was happening at the same time with the same corrupt Mexican leadership. That
Mhm.
DEA agent stumbled into it, didn't know what he had witnessed, and he was killed for something he didn't know, which is the irony. He was
That's
killed for what they
crazy.
thought he might know that he actually didn't know. And then they set up a couple of Mexican cartel guys who took care of the business, but they weren't the ones ordering it. Mexican cartels had never done that before. It's like they suddenly breached it. I don't think so. Um,
Wow.
and in fact, one of his lifelong buddies came out with a 4-part documentary saying the DEA and the CIA and the U.S. military were the one that ordered it. But we made a
Mhm.
huge deal about it, went down and illegally seized the doctor that we claimed was responsible. That has set up bad extradition law in America so that now you can kidnap people legally, bring them back here in violation of extradition treaties. That doctor ultimately gets acquitted because they didn't have any evidence that he actually did what they said he did. In reality, they likely wouldn't have used that doctor. I think that whole show was to create that narrative so that they would get away with the fact that it was likely a CIA doctor on the ground there.
Huh.
That's who they would use because they wouldn't want his information in the wrong hands. They wanted to interrogate him in such a way that they would get it. And the reality is, we've been in business with the Mexican drug cartels all the way through. They're not
Sure.
able to launder the money they're able to launder. And what happens is we let Guzman, he has to retire to a hardcore prison, but we're not touching his kids. Right. I mean, either
Sure.
way, somehow the cartels continue to operate, and the false assumption, where I kind of like what Trump is talking about, is Trump is kind of exposing that the intelligence branches would never want to actually attack the cartels because they're in bed with the cartels.
Sure.
That aspect of what
Yeah.
he's exposing, either intentionally or accidentally, is useful. But people who think the source of the problem is the cartels are people who don't know how the drug trade really sadly works.
I mean, it's incredible because it's not just about Mexico either. It extends all over the world, like the Afghanistan opium trade. I mean,
Oh, of course.
it's one of the biggest like reasons that they were there for as
Golden
long as they were. Yeah,
Triangle in Vietnam.
right, exactly. So it's just, again, it was a little bit surprising to see that kind of thing from Viva, but I'm
Oh,
sure
that's
that
because
he's
I
gonna
don't
watch
think.
this and he's gonna find out what.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think it will take a little while because I think that's the kind of thing that shocks people at too many levels. They're like, I mean,
Yeah.
the idea that our government would
Mhm.
knowingly, deliberately set people up to fail. Smart, creative people who become criminals rather than socially, economically productive people, if they're simply put into a different direction and given different opportunities and incentives. And all kinds of people who get addicted, all kinds of people who die from the fentanyl-laced drugs in particular lately.
Incredibly
the idea
sad.
that our government could care less about that and that sees that as actually a benefit that they need to maintain control. And it, I think, shocks people. And the way I've always tried to explain it to people is our governments are like plantation owners. So they look out there and they see a bunch of people that they think logically should hang them. And so they're like, how do I maintain control? And they'll go to any technique to maintain it. And they don't really value their humans as humans. I mean, this is Alex Jones' ultimately point when he says they're anti-human. It means they see humans as cattle, what they produce, what they sell, what they consume. That's what their value is, as people to be controlled, but not as people to value independently as human beings.
Right. And that's why it's really interesting when they talk about systemic racism, or in a sense, it's correct in the sense that it's slavery, but we're all slaves to the system, because that's what that means. That's what Alex Jones is talking about, is that they treat us like plantation owners, like slaves, because we are that for them. We're
commodities.
We are commodities.
We're bales of hay, we're barrels of oil.
That's right. And that's what's going on in this world. And it's really crazy. And I guess you're right in that sense, is that sometimes some things are too much for some people because you still want to get up in the day, right? Like you still want to have a reason to get out of bed. And I understand that. But it is so crazy. Well, one of the things that has been coming out, though, and I was surprised by this a little bit, I guess in a sense that, there's so many things that happened in the last few years that just kind of makes you go like, what the, like, us and Nerdrotic, we always joke around. I don't know if you know who Nerdrotic is, but Gary from Nerdrotic, we joke around.
Sidebar.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, so we joke around about how CERN actually did work, and we did go to another dimension. Now we're all in clown world dimension because CERN did its thing. So I feel like that is a fact, and we are in clown world, and something happened. But now Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter, and all of this weird stuff started happening, like, I don't know, the leftist media getting exposed, and the FBI getting exposed, and the government getting exposed. And now Fauci is being exposed about being such a fraud and a hack. And this guy's BS goes back to like the freaking 80s and the whole AIDS situation. But I wanted to get your take on some of this stuff because, for example, there was this thread that went on with Mark Anderson here, starting this thread saying that it's not accurate or fair to say that Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, is the leading expert of infectious diseases, has ever lied. Dr. Fauci is highly respected scientist, blah, 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 blah. So basically like saying that he's never lied. And then, of course, Elon Musk comes through with this article from Newsweek, saying that he did in fact lie to Congress about the Wuhan lab and all that kind of stuff. Fauci was untruthful to Congress about Wuhan lab research. New documents appear to show. He shared this with everybody. Then he went on to talk about how the Fauci's wife is the head of the ethics committee, bioethics at NIH. Which is funny that he says almost no one seems to realize, because I was like, we were screaming about this a few years ago on Twitter, and we would have been banned on Twitter and on YouTube and on like anywhere else that you talked about that this guy's wife was the head of this, and no one's ever going to talk about. She's never going to be able to talk about any of this in court if it happens. Like she can't, because it's his spouse. He got spousal rights. And then he comes back and he says, gain of function in this context is just another way of saying bioweapons, some good nuggets. An article important to note that Fauci authored the 2012 paper arguing for gain of function research. Obama wisely put this on pause, but Fauci restarted it. Despite these glaring issues, Twitter nonetheless had an internal Slack channel unironically called Fauci Fan Club. Ew. God, that guy's such a troll. Like, I can't believe that this would actually be a thing. But apparently it was. So, Barnes, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this guy's ever going to get any sort of consequences for lying to everybody and basically being a piece of shit human being?
Unfortunately, very unlikely from a legal perspective,
Oh, no.
because of how the system works and operates. But I think he's been outed to a degree he never anticipated possible, and no one who would replace him would have ever anticipated conceivable either. So, I
Mhm.
mean, it started with Robert Kennedy taking the time to write the book,
Yes.
The Real Anthony Fauci.
Mhm.
He cited it so many different places, sourced it so well, was so thorough in the research
Mhm.
that no one's been able to challenge a single factual assertion he's made in that book about Fauci.
Got banned from all social media for even fucking talking about that. Yep. Mhm.
Exactly. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, who Bobby Kennedy's suing
Mhm.
because she tried to stop Amazon from allowing the book to be sold.
Mhm.
I mean, all kinds of ways they tried to interfere with it. It was a number one book for a long period of time. The media tried to pretend it wasn't. It's one of the best-selling books in recent history,
Mhm.
and it exposed, for anybody out there who wants to know who Fauci is, with the best, well-researched, well-resourced book, just get Robert Kennedy Jr.'s The Real Anthony Fauci. He spent the better part of a year with a whole team of people building that book. And so obviously he's a guy who lies and lies repeatedly, despite the chatbots and AI trying to say otherwise.
Mhm.
And I think that aspect of him may face consequence in the sense of the court of public opinion, his reputational interest, and so forth.
Oh,
And
okay.
his successors, I think, will have nowhere near the green light that he had. I mean, this is a guy who was corrupt all the way back to the AIDS crisis.
Yes.
Led people to believe that you could get AIDS in your in your kitchen.
Mhm.
Helped terrorize people concerning it. That led to a lot of discrimination, not only against gay men, but also against their mothers and sisters and relatives and caregivers.
Yeah.
Lost jobs, lost positions, denied accommodations, you name it.
Mhm. Yep.
The Americans with Disabilities Act was amended in part to make sure that didn't happen again. And yet we just faced that for the
Here
last 2
we
years.
are. Yeah.
With doing it again based on vaccine status. So
Mhm.
but I think, no question, it's great to see Muzz outing everybody,
Mhm.
exposing everybody. Particularly, he clearly seems inclined and focused on Fauci. But I think the Fauci and the lockdown may have been Musk's red pill.
I think it
Um,
was too. Well, that and I think the last straw was when Twitter banned uh the Babylon Bee. I think at that point, because Elon has a great sense of humor. So I think at that point he was like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Like you can't even make satire anymore. And I think that was that's my theory, was that was the last straw where he was like, if this is going to be a war against comedy and just like regular speech and just we're just gonna can't even laugh anymore, then I have something to say about all of this. And I don't think he quite imagined how much of a shit show he was going to inherit until he did, and now he's just like, "Oh my god." That's why he's like, when he was making that video about, like, when he was on that podcast, like, everything everyone said about Twitter turned out to be true. And it's like, those are the things that are really interesting. Now, I saw this going around. I don't know how accurate this is. Maybe you can kind of comment on this. This guy saying, did you know that there's a pending federal court case right now that aims to prove that Pfizer's mRNA shots were sold to the government based on fraudulent data and could upend Pfizer's contract with the government? It could, in effect, stop the shots. Do you have any comments about this?
yeah, that's my case.
I know.
So that's Brooke Jackson has brought a suit, Ketam claim, which is a claim on behalf of the United States. It's called a False Claims Act claim,
Mhm.
on behalf of all the people of America, against Pfizer and some affiliated entities, for getting billions of dollars from the government based on false and fraudulent documentation, certification, forged documents, fraudulent documents, documents that should have never been approved, information that should have never been stated, etc. Basically, that the drug that everybody knows as the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is not safe. It's not effective. It's not even a vaccine. And that Pfizer knew that, and that they knew of its dangers. They knew of its inefficacies. And so they just lied. And Pfizer, and so she has brought an action to, one, recover that money for the American people. That money would go back to the Treasury from Pfizer. But the other is to stop this from continuing and exposing it on a grand scale. So it's always difficult, these kind of cases. The reality is this is the biggest public health disaster maybe in the history of America. Probably so, once all the deaths and disabilities are added up from the combination of the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates, and the lies about this vaccine and its dangers, which were assumed to be 10 years away. And it turned out they were 10 days away in many cases. Yeah. And so I think that the question is whether the courts have the courage to expose one of the biggest health disasters in American history. Pfizer is, speaking of drug dealers and cartels look like a street corner drug dealer compared to Pfizer. Nobody's a bigger criminal drug dealer anywhere in the world than Pfizer. Nobody's been criminally fined more than Pfizer. Yeah, Pfizer and Moderna. Did you see this other thing that came out the other day from President Netanyahu, and how he basically said that Israel was their lab? That was, and I think that was partially on
fascinating.
Yeah, it was partially Netanyahu's mistake. Was allowing Pfizer to treat Israel as their personal lab, because it backfired on Israel too. The vaccine turned out not to be safe, not to be effective, and again, not even a vaccine in the understanding that ordinary people have. And so I don't know if the courts have the courage to stand up to Pfizer and expose Pfizer, given the scale and scope of the corruption in this case implicates. I hope they do, but we'll find out. But we'll be litigating it all the way through.
Is that one of those things that kind of like we were talking about earlier, where, because you're talking about courage, right? And like, is it too much for some people? Like, do you think like that is like the red pilling, that they're not going to, like, they're just like, oh no, like this can't be?
Definitely not federal judges. Federal judges are appointed, or state judges, frankly. Federal judges are appointed to the bench because they have shown a lifetime. They have a certain unique life experience that tends to be from the corporate and government side of the aisle. So they're accustomed to seeing the world through that perspective. And like, a lot of people think it's corruption that causes courts to do something they don't understand. That's very rarely the case. In most cases, you have some judge who thinks he's doing the right thing. But what it is his or her life experience is so limited that they tend to see the world through the corporate or government perspective. And that's problem one. Problem two is that they are generally appointed because they are perceived to have a deference to authority. The federal government is not in the business of appointing federal judges who want to take down or expose big corporations and government corruption. That isn't why they're put there. They may think that's why they're put there, but it ain't. So, and some judges have openly and publicly written about this, that and it's most exposed in the background of federal judges, biographical background. Overwhelmingly come from upper middle class families, overwhelmingly come from corporate or government legal work. Very few come from, like, the ordinary lawyer does family law, personal injury law, a little bit of everything. Your average small town lawyer does some criminal defense, does some civil rights, etc. Your average federal judge has often done none of that in their entire career. They've often only worked for corporations or only worked for the government or both. And so that's why when you come in and say, hey, by the way, judge, this big, powerful drug company lied to everybody to line their pockets with billions of dollars for a product that was unsafe, ineffective, and mislabeled as a vaccine when it was a drug, a dangerous drug. And the government should have done something about it and didn't. So you're accusing both. Your average federal judge thinks you're insane. And so they want to find any excuse whatsoever to say you're wrong. And that's why these cases rarely get the opportunity to have trial by jury, even though that's what our Constitution says is supposed to happen.
I see. That's really interesting. We're gonna listen to this video in a second, guys, but I
Sure.
want to ask you one more question because like this pertains to me personally because I am in Mexico. I am not vaccinated. I'm pure blood. And I can't enter your country. I can't go into the United States because they're still not allowing foreign travelers to enter the United States if you're unvaccinated. And supposedly there's supposed to be something going on January 8th where they're going to assess the situation. But do you think they're ever going to stop with this bullshit? Like, are they going to let me in your country ever again?
The Biden administration, not if the Biden administration had its will, no. Though the irony is this, you can't fly in legally, but if you cross the border illegally, you don't have to be vaccinated.
I know everybody says that, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to drive all the way down to freaking Loretto and like go through the freaking border there. I did that once, and it was so hectic because because we drove down. We drove down from Vancouver, and so we went to Texas, and we did the the border thing. Man, that place is a freaking dump. Like, I don't want to go there ever again. Like, so I'm like, I don't know if it's worth it to go to the United States just through that way. Like, I want to fly in. But man, they're losing a lot of tourist money, I would think, for not letting
Yeah, I
unvaccinated
mean,
people in the country.
at least Europe reversed course on all of that. So you would have
Right?
thought. I think all the European countries you can now travel to without a vaccine.
Yeah,
I know.
even
I know.
Canada. Even
Yeah,
Canada
I
you
know.
can.
So it is. I am surprised. I think the X factor for them will be their argument to the Supreme Court on Title 42.
Yes.
If they want to really not have Title 42 enforced, they need to change those rules.
Can you
Because
expand on Title 42?
sure, so basically Trump used it as a pretext to stop illegal immigration. He said,
Yes.
"Look, we got a COVID problem, so well, because of COVID, we're everybody's got to stay in Mexico,
Mhm.
and can't come here, and
Right.
while they process their asylum application." The Biden administration, of course, didn't like that, so they tried to ignore it and eviscerate it,
Mhm.
and the Supreme Court put a stop to it. But as I agree, kind of with Justice Gorsuch, that really Biden, that we don't have an emergency period, so there shouldn't be any Title 42 application. So even though that means
Sure.
a key border limitation policy gets removed, I think legally Gorsuch is in the right.
Mhm.
But the problem with the Biden administration is you can't claim on the one hand there's no emergency, so we can take away Title 42's limitations on border crossing, but there is an emergency such that you can't legally enter the country without a vaccine. That these
Mm.
are incompatible positions that Gorsuch and others will hammer them on in February when oral arguments are scheduled. So I think by that point, probably to salvage their ability to gut Title 42, they will probably get rid of the requirement that people coming into the country be vaccinated.
Yeah, and the weird part for me with Canada, because I never thought Canada was going to get rid of it, like, ever. And I think that one of the reasons that they did get rid of it was because of what happened with the truckers and the bank accounts. And I think that they played their hand too soon and probably got a few phone calls from, the big honchos of the World Economic Forum saying you played your hand too soon, and you shouldn't have done that yet, and therefore we're gonna reverse course on a lot of this because a lot of people started getting red pilled about what was going on, and they can't have everybody getting red pilled at the same time. So they were like, you know what, open the borders, whatever, everything's fine, you guys, we're all okay. Just kind of like what Netanyahu's doing here. Like, he's so proud. He's so proud when when I was watching this video, I was like, this dude is so proud of literally using his people as guinea pigs. It's so insane to me.
One example.
Listen to what he has to say. It's crazy.
So you'll see, because I don't want to bore you with detailed plans. But they are detailed in my mind. We came out of COVID first. I described that in my book, my conversations with Albert Bourla of Pfizer, and I persuaded him to give tiny Israel the necessary vaccines to get us out first from the COVID. And the reason I could do that is because we have a database, 98%, a medical database. 98% of our population has digitized medical records and little card And anywhere you go, in any hospital in Israel, north, south, doesn't make any difference. Boom, you punch it in, and you know everything about this patient for the last 20 years.
He's so proud of all this like big brother shit. He's like, yeah, man, we were the place to be like this. So we, we know where you are, wherever you are, whoever you are, it doesn't matter. Like, it's so crazy how like the way that he describes the situation.
I said, we'll use that to tell you whether these vaccines, what do they do to people, not individual people, not with their individual identities, but statistically, what does it do to people with, meningitis? What does it do to people with high blood pressure? What is it? You want to know that. So Israel became, if you will, the lab for Pfizer. And that's how we did it. We got it out. And we gave the information to the world, not only been published in medical magazines and so on. That's a database we have. I intend to bring on that database of personal medical records for entire population, a genetic database, genomes, okay? Give me a saliva sample, volunteer. But I'm sure most people would do it. Maybe we'll pay them. Now we have a genetic record on a medical record.
Most people will do it. Maybe we'll pay them. That is hilarious what he's saying. It's kind of like the when you would hear those crazy promos for the vaccine in New York, like come and get your vaccine, you get a free burger, like free burgers and fries for every vaccine sold or whatever, not sold. It's crazy.
Of a robust population, you have to have diversified populations. We have people from 100 lands. This is a very powerful engine. Now let pharma companies, let medical companies, let them run algorithms on this database. Okay? I'm telling you right away that I'll give preference for a few years to Israeli firms, but you can create, and then to the world, but you can create, a biotechnological industry that is unheard of right now, unimagined even. And these are just the examples. So we can become stave off Iran, become a light unto the nations.
I love that he had to mention Iran, like in the middle of this conversation. It's just like, by the way, we're gonna stave off Iran. Greatest like, country ever.
Groundbreaking. One example.
Oh my God, this was even better than I imagined. That was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of frightening. I've had mixed views of Netanyahu over the years. Respect his tactical skill, political skill. The only guy who can manage aspects of Israeli politics in its modern age, but everything he handled in this respect was very problematic, and that conversation is deeply problematic because it suggests it's exactly the Bill Gates, George Soros worldview. Even though Soros is a critic of Israel's government, it's very much using the Israeli people as the test subjects for creating a global social control through digital chips that are ultimately going to be stored on your physical body. And that's what the digitization of medical records was really about. It wasn't to make it more efficient. And what he talks about there is, borderline eugenics is where some of that is going, and some of the genetic controls he's talking about. So the fact he embraces it so wholeheartedly,
I know, isn't it so crazy?
Yeah, I mean, for my pro-Israeli friends out there, they're going to have to defend that because that's deeply problematic. That's like Trump made his mistakes at going along with Fauci and Birx and the vaccine as a solution, and they played to his ego, and he took the bait, and he still hasn't swallowed the fact that was a mistake, and he should move on from it. Use the Brooke Jackson case as his means to do so. Do what Ben Shapiro did. And Ben Shapiro's like, oh, geez, if I'd known it was all fake, I never would have been for it. If I'd known it was all a lie, I wouldn't have been for it. Well, that evidence was out there at the time, Benji. You just didn't like who was saying it. But Trump could take the same route, say that he's shocked that the government, that these big drug companies lied to everybody to race this, to push this through. And
he could just be like, like I trusted the people that I put in charge, and they decided to be part of the swamp, and I'm going to drain the swamp. So this time they're gone. They're all gone.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think. But it's unsettling. I mean, what he describes is what James Corbett in his Corbett Report 4-part documentary series on Bill Gates that he
Mhm.
put out at the very beginning of all the COVID issues.
I watched it. It's
Yeah,
great.
said was
Great
coming
stuff.
down the pipeline.
Yep.
Said, you look at the combination they want between digital currencies and digital medical records, and then ultimately digital delivery of medical treatment. Like there's somehow they would have the ability to do things with that chip in your body. These are all patents Bill Gates has been trying to develop in one way, shape, or form, becomes the ultimate means of complete centralized control by the state and its related entities. And it's kind of terrifying. The biggest Israeli critics out there have the smarter Israeli critics, because there's the Israeli critics that I don't pay as much attention to anymore, because I just can't take the Palestinian side. Too many problems with both where Yasser Arafat handled it and others handled it. So I just can't. I'm not on that side when it comes to that equation.
Okay.
But
see, we're on opposing views when it comes to that, because I am on that side.
Oh yeah, no, and a fair number of people are, and people
Yeah.
with Persian or Arab backgrounds. That's not uncommon. It's just I can't. I mean,
I understand. I understand completely.
The first Palestinian leader really should not have aligned with the Nazis. I'm still grieving over that. But
I get that. I feel you on that one. Yep.
But I think that the other criticism that Israel is used as kind of a test case for other forms of social and governmental experimentation because of its kind of unique position in the world. In other words, it's surrounded by adversaries. Its geography is very small. Its population isn't that big. That it's in a uniquely vulnerable, dependent position.
Yes.
Formed by people who suffered all kinds of horrific traumas, so that it's the kind of place you could have a dangerous collectivist experiment without people paying attention.
Yeah.
And
That's
clearly
scary.
that's what he's describing he's going to do. And I get some of the Israeli concern with Iran. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on the protests there and the rest. Because I have Iranian friends, Persian friends from LA. And I mean, but they came over right after the Shah fell, and the rest, they're mostly very anti the regime.
Most people are, especially the people who've left.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And then you have both legitimate and illegitimate criticism of the regime, and so figuring out what's true is always tricky.
It is so tricky, Robert. Oh my God. It's one of those things where I've even kind of like decided to like stay out of it a little bit, because it's just so depressing to get into this rabbit hole of how corrupt everything is. Because once again, like, even if first of all, the situation that started the entire the new revolution was very falsely reported, because it wasn't like okay. And let me make my position clear first. I fucking hate the government of Iran. I don't like the Islamic government of Iran. I think they're terrible people. I disavow. Okay. But with the way the West wanted to kind of go with this idea that they killed that woman, that didn't quite go as they said, because the Iranian government did release the video of what happened when she died. And even though, yes, she was in the station, she wasn't held, she wasn't forcefully brought there, she wasn't shot, she wasn't physically attacked in any way. She had a heart attack or something, that she went into a stroke and she fell down, and they took her to the hospital, and she passed away hours later in the hospital. And the person who was talking to her at the time was a woman. It was a woman that was, in the government, but she was just talking to her. And then all of a sudden, like, she collapsed, and all that happened. Now, I have my own point of views, which would probably get me banned on YouTube if I talk about it. But I think because, a lot of Iranians are, let's just say, pro-vax as well. So I think that something may have had it happen, because it came out later on that she had prior health issues, and, the autoimmune system and all that stuff that goes into that whole thing. So I think there's a lot of connections with that. And I think that they took this situation and ran with it. Now, sometimes it's just a spark, that it takes a spark, to start something. But then we have a lot of let's just say bad faith players trying to get in on the game and replace the government in order to put their own actors on display. There's a lot of people who are heavily involved, and I'm talking about on the Persian side, they're heavily involved with the United States government that want to go and be placed in places of power now. They've been, in like one of the head of the Kurd movement, which is I forget her name right now, but she was like basically friends with Obama and them, and now she's like, yeah, like Iran, and we need to replace the government and blah blah blah. So it's all very like, oh, let's just put our people of places in the right places. It's just all a big power move designed under this crazy incident that happened, and no one knows what's true anymore, and no one knows what is what. A lot of people there have grievances, it's true, but I don't think the revolution is going to be, first of all, it's not going to be televised. And second of all, it's not going to be the way that they're talking about right now. And it's not big enough for it to be the kind of revolution that they want it to be. It's not.
What do you think keeps the Iranian regime in power? Because what's always interested me, at least part of it, is the perception, and like Cuba, the ability to blame the U.S. and the West because of the history of prior intervention in the country provides an easy bugaboo that allows them to control dissident movements. But otherwise, it's, the Persian history is so rich culturally, and so it's so background in kind of really religious tolerance. The history of Persians were the greatest, most religiously tolerant empire maybe ever up to that period, and for a long time after. And so it seems like it's like the Ayatollah, who came in as this sort of quasi-populist revolutionary against the corrupt Western power structure, more so in my view than as a religious totalitarian. But what he's delivered has been religious totalitarianism. He has not delivered the economic reforms to the degree and the scale that were promised. And so I've always wondered, how long can he keep a naturally open, tolerant society looking for economic opportunity? Especially you look at Persians that have left Iran, high level of entrepreneurial success almost everywhere in the world they go. It's like, how do you keep that suppressed long enough? And can you just say it's all America's fault? It's just death to America. How long can you keep that afloat?
I think it's such a complicated situation. I think a lot of it has to do with apathy. There's a lot of apathy that is going on in Iran right now. But it's also, a lot of it does have to do with there's several things going on. Okay. There is a group of people that don't like the government. That's true. But there's a high volume of people that do. There's a lot of, Islamic people that like the government.
Is it because of co-religionist belief, or is it because of they're economically actually benefiting from the regime?
It's all of the above. Like, for example, like one of this woman, let's say, for example, that, got harassed and then went into the station and was being talked to by a woman. A lot of these Islamic women don't want to lose their places of power. So guess who they're voting for when the time comes? It's to keep the regime, because they actually do put women in power and great places of power. And they're fine with telling everybody what to do because they're a bunch of psychopaths that like telling everybody what to do. So there's high quality, like there's a high group of people that actually like the government. They like the regime. They like all of it. And then there's a lot of stuff going on in the meantime, which is directly the result of the West's problem. Like, for example, the sanctions, and how the crushing sanctions are affecting innocent Iranians incredibly. And then and then the Ayatollah comes on and starts talking about how America fucking sucks because they're doing this to us and they're doing that to us. And it's all true because they're seeing it happen in real life. So then they're like, well, he's got a point, you know what I mean? And then they start seeing like there's other things too. So like, whether you agree with the government or not, there's a lot of stuff going on that even Putin talks about now with regards to the West, and how, let's say that's the kind of stuff I talk about, Robert, with regards to the culture war stuff that Gary talks about, and how, like, this whole how do I even say this without getting banned? The entire like idea of transgenderism, like the whole, sex is binary, this, that, even Putin talked about that, in his big
Right.
speech. So like that kind of stuff, they show that in Iran as well. And they're like, hey, look at the West culture. This is what they're doing. Do you guys want to do that? And the people are like, nah, like we're good, because Persian people are still very traditional people. They don't believe in the kind of stuff that's come out here. So again, it's all very complicated, and it's not just like it's not that all the people want the government gone. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
very complicated, and I think there's a lot of apathy. I think it's just so complicated over there with Iran. And I'm one of those people who I wish that the government would go, because then I can actually go back to my country and be able to, safely go there, because I feel like I would get arrested if I went there, because I would just start mouthing off at everybody. And they'd be like, no, women cannot talk here. Stop it. No, I'm just joking. They can. They're
Right.
pretty good. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, I make fun, because that was one of the things that they were talking about, especially with regards to Tehran, because Iran is so, like, in a sense, it's very liberal. Like, we're not talking about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about Iran, and Iran is, women are wearing their hair, even though they're wearing the scarf, they're wearing their hair, like they're barely showing the scarf. So even like if you go to like YouTube and you put like Tehran Mall and you watch like the women that are walking around there, they're barely wearing the scarf now. Like it's not that big of a thing over there, and people are very fine with it. Kind of like how people started being really fine with wearing the mask really quickly. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
Sure.
just it's one of those things where it's like part of their culture now, but even that is blasphemy for a Persian to say, because it's not part of our culture. The Islamics made it part of our culture, but it's been
Right.
going on for so long, and people are so used to it, they don't even know how to live without it now, just like the way the West is with the masks. It's just really, again, a lot of parallels going on. So that those are my thoughts. I hope, like, I know I was all over the place, but Iran, I'm I'm passionate about it, but I'm also like, I fucking hate everything that's going on over there. It's just it's so frustrating, because you can't ever get like the pure, like I want that pure revolution, like I want that, like the fire in the bellies of like everyone to rise up and be like, you know what, no more to the government. But it's all corrupt. Like everybody is just playing their own game, and that's sad. That's sad to me. I'm gonna get some of these super chats now, because people have been so incredibly generous tonight, and I'm sure there's probably questions for you as well. So let's get into these. John Burns 279 says pizza box cued cops into where Andrew was.
I suspect that's not true, by the way.
Wow.
I know that's the popular story, but I guarantee you they knew where he was all along.
And probably, I mean,
They leaked that story to explain, oh, we're only arresting him now because we only now knew where he was. Yeah, well, what, you didn't know the last year? I'm not buying that.
John Burns for 699. You know who got impartial justice in Romania? Nikolai. Wait, I can't read this guy's name.
Ceausescu, I think is how it's something like that. Ceausescu is somewhere in that vicinity.
The last communist leader of Romania.
Yeah.
Well, he was a communist.
He met a very unhappy ending. Let's put it that way.
Was it as unhappy as Mussolini?
Of that variety, yes.
Is it bad that I kind of, never mind, I'm not going to say that. Okay, Scratchpad for Judy. Thank you so much. Says Snowden book is a very inspiring. John Burns for 699 says it wasn't suddenly Trump was political donor of both the Republicans and Democrats. It wasn't suddenly both parties knew legalized bribery. That, I mean, in a way that's true, because I remember when Donald Trump was a Democrat. So that's interesting, because
yeah, I think it may have been wasn't that part of Dave Chappelle's rap, like his Saturday Night Live opening? Maybe it was something he said recently where he's like he really respected Trump when Trump was like,
yes,
I know the system is corrupt because I bribe them on a daily basis.
Yeah, because I use it or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was true though. Like Trump was like so popular with everybody, and everybody wanted to like be his friend, and he was like in every rap video, and like he was in freaking Home Alone 2 for fuck's sakes. And
Yeah.
now they want to get rid of him in Home Alone 2. Like they cut him out of that. I mean, it's just so
Yes.
stupid, so childish. John Burns to 699. The U.S. will do what they always do: get involved with one cartel and then dominate the others. It's not about drugs; it's about the power. Very
And you can
true.
even see it from their geopolitical perspective. If you put aside the morality of drug involvement, that isn't the U.S. geopolitical interest better served by being aligned with a cartel rather than cartels being independent and separate of that power structure?
Well, exactly.
From a pure geopolitical perspective, what they're doing makes sense.
Well, exactly. And also, like, what is the best way to keep your country at number one status, right? Is to get rid of the other countries that's like literally right next door to you. The power to have better economics, better, like all the good things about a country. If you keep them down, then you're going to be the one that's number one. So sure, including destroying the culture. That makes sense. John Burns, that's why it's so wild that now the American culture is getting destroyed. Like they're destroying their own culture. And that's why it's getting so wild to me that that's why we talk about the culture war all the time. It's like they used to be a lot more outwards and thinking like outwardly about how do we keep these other people down. And now they're talking about keeping their own people down. And that to me is just wild because it's like you can never have enough power, It's nuts. John Burns is 699 says when Colorado and Washington State legalized marijuana, the cartels stopped planting weed. Canada has lost lots of legal weed stores. They do now. They didn't used to be like that.
The first attack though came all the way back in the 70s, as portrayed in Narcos, actually, when the Mexican government, on the behest of the U.S., waged war on the marijuana dealers of Sonora. And kind of forced them into the cocaine business.
I've never seen Narcos. Now I want to because
it's solid. Yeah, I mean it's not like perfect, but it hints at stuff.
I see. I want to watch it now because of the stuff that you're talking about. But the reason I didn't watch it is because I was like, I live here and I don't know if I want to know. Like just kind of like ignorance is bliss a little bit.
Oliver Stone movies and some of those are a lot rougher when it comes to the Mexican drug cartels.
That's true. I mean, there was also like that other movie that was I think it's called like Air America. That's
about the Vietnam, and then you have the Barry Seal movie that Tom Cruise played in. They portrayed the great Mexican drug dealer, who I liked how they ended the series because rumor was that he didn't really die in plastic surgery. He faked his own death and disappeared to an island with a mistress, somewhere in Latin America, and he was perfectly suited to do that. I think they called him what was it, super something of the skies or whatever. Fascinating story, but they do touch on some of those in Narcos. That was really well done. They touch on the political connections. They only hint at how far it goes, though.
Now I want to watch the show because you said it was really good.
Well done cinematically, good acting, good casting, good dramas.
Other than Narcos, what's your favorite show to watch right now? Like what's your go-to right now?
Let's see. The new Jack Ryan is out, but that looks kind of lame. It looks like they're playing on all the anti-Russia stuff. It's like a fake version of the anti-Russia stuff. It's like something from the 90s, their version of it. So I think it's
like the Air Force One style, like anti-Russia stuff. Like
the leader's clearly not a Putin substitute. Sure. But some like Homeland went disastrous when it went that route. When it became obsessively anti-Russian and anti-Alex Jones, they just ruined what was a great season.
They did the same thing in Stranger Things season 3. It was all of a sudden like, oh, we're just anti-Russia and like Russia's the evil guys. I was like, where the fuck did Russia come from? This is supposed to be like the upside down.
Well, you want a believable enemy, but a politically correct believable enemy. And for from 9/11 to like 2007, that could be Islamic terrorists, right?
Yes, and it was.
It was, and then they were like, that's not politically correct anymore. We have a Barack Hussein Obama as our president, so forth. So that wasn't okay. You couldn't really make it anybody brown or black because that raised its own questions. So that ruled out the gangs, that ruled out the cartels for the most part. There's
Yeah.
a little bit about that. So instead, it became all generic East Europeans or Russians. Those were the only politically permissible bad guys. Also, that I think is part of our intelligence apparatus. I agree with Mark Robert, who does America's Untold Stories with Eric Hunley, who has identified how deep the CIA. He experienced it personally because he wrote the original version of The Recruit, which is now there's a next Netflix series. There was a movie. The CIA basically purchased it behind the scenes and rewrote his script so it would be remade in a CIA friendly way.
Oh,
and so and they do this all the time. I think they are involved. Like, take for example the movie about the famine that should be about exposing corruption by the New York Times and covering up for the Stalinist regime in Russia. Instead, it suggested the entire famine just took place in Ukraine, which was not true. In fact, most of the famine took place outside of Ukraine. And the part of where the famine took place in Ukraine was Eastern Ukraine, where the Kulaks and the Cossacks were probably being targeted by Stalin because of their history of independence. As somebody from the Caucasus, he knew. He understood that geopolitical risk for him. But so I think you look at the CIA has a way of injecting itself in a lot of these shows and films to guide. I don't think it's a coincidence that for about a decade we've had the idea that Russia it's like, why does the ordinary American think Russia is pure evil?
Social engineering.
Exactly. It's like most people don't know Russia. They've never been to Russia. They don't know any Russians. They don't know Russia history. They don't follow Russian news. They're not Russian political analysts. So it's like, what's their grounds for? They have no lived experience that forms the foundation for this. It's been these thoughts planted not only in the newspapers, but in TV shows and films. Russia bad, Russian bad, Russia violent, Russia
Same
criminal.
thing with Mexico and Mexicans. Mexico equals cartel. Mexico equals just
if you go further back,
fuckers.
50s, 60s, 70s. Back in the day when I actually did a study of this when I was at Yale, the two groups most often portrayed as untrustworthy in Hollywood films or TV were either poor Southern whites or African Americans. They were the ones that were scary, that were dangerous, that were bad, that were problematic. Now, at some point, it became politically incorrect to focus so heavily on Black Americans. Though that still took a while. It wasn't really until the 90s that really faded out. You still see a lot of stereotypes and caricatures and fear-mongering throughout the 1980s. But poor Southern whites were still okay to mock and critique and criticize and satirize and Honeybee and other things like this. Some of the reality TV shows were really about mocking poor white, working class white Southern Appalachian subculture. And you've seen it selectively in different places. But the fact that the Russians were to give people an idea, as was mentioned in the chat earlier, the role the CIA played, it's not a coincidence that Rambo, it's either 2 or 3, is all about helping the Taliban in Afghanistan. Or it's the Mujahideen at that time. It's because we wanted to promote that conflict. So the CIA cuts a deal. And what they do is they promise, the CIA and the Pentagon promise access to U.S. like airships or U.S. helicopters, they'll promise script assistance. Well, they'll demand the script assistance, and they'll promise in exchange for it access to facilities that will make the film look better. In terms of the weaponry, in terms of the machines, in terms of the locations, etc. And for it, they get to convince me. I mean, how embarrassing is that Rambo movie now? Like, when we're cheering the Mujahideen, is anybody cheering the Mujahideen today? Given how that turned out, I mean, that shows you the power.
Wow, I've never seen that movie.
Oh yeah, you should just watch the end of it, and it's almost laughably bad. It'd be like having Hitler at the end and clapping hands with him, right?
It's like what Kanye West wants to do. He's like, oh my God, he's my hero. Like, what? What are you talking about, bro?
It's like one after the other. In fact, Roger Stone, some other people that I know, Paul Manafort used to be involved in making films that that did the same thing in Africa, and so the Hollywood CIA has always been hyper concerned I mean, they helped create a bunch of fake cultural institutions around the globe to promote certain poets, promote certain artists, promote certain writers, promote certain musicians, promote certain scholars, promote certain academics. That's how Obama ended. That's how Obama's father ended up here in the first place. He was really a CIA recruit from Kenya. Kennedy thought it was part of his program. He didn't realize CIA had their own agenda, unfortunately, and hijacked his program for other purposes. So it shows the power of it. I mean, there's always been this cultural obsession of the elites with controlling communication through Hollywood. The part that gets the story that gets undertold is where the CIA plays a role, and that's where people should. Also, the other thing is, like, really sharp critics will plant real deep truths in those films. You know, Born Identity has some of my favorite lines. The Heat has some of my favorite lines about how
good movie. Yeah.
How do you circumvent the system? How do you defeat the system? How do you get around the system? They'll actually script it for you in live time. They'll tell you how to get around the system, how to have multiple identifications, multiple passports, multiple citizenships, how to have assets in multiple forms that can access where you need to go, when you need to go, how you need to go, how to have burner phones and laptops with no IP history and all of that. I mean, they tell you these things. So they tell you not only do they have corruption and the system planning its thoughts into your ideas through popular films, there's also the resistance ideas out there. I mean, that's why you have shows like the Lone Wolf or the Lone Gunman, I think they called the series.
Yeah, the Lone Gunman.
X-Files spinoff, which actually talked about putting an airplane crashing into the World Trade Center about 6 with falsely attributed causation as a way to trigger a military buildup and mass surveillance. And that was 6 months before 9/11 is when that show ran.
Yeah, isn't that funny how the COVID thing was like also, event 216, like, there's a lot of stuff that always happens before big events, and you're like, and then later on you're like, oh my God, they actually like really talked about this. Oh no.
Oh, I know. It's like one after. I mean, Dr. Strangelove. I mean, was loosely based. A lot of the generals in that were based on real life generals,
people
that were likely culpable in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
I always maintained I think that's the reason he was taken out, is because he just talked about getting rid of the CIA. Like that's it. Like there was really
he diverted from the deep state on foreign policy.
Yeah,
and it was a deep state that thought it should govern the world. And was very arrogant after World War II with that idea. And they wanted to use nuclear weapons everywhere. They wanted to escalate conflict everywhere. And there was coups all over the place. And they'd had a lot of success. In other words, I mean, they were successfully, by the time JFK comes into power, they're running Iran, as an example. It was their personal favorite beacon of MI6 CIA power. They had managed to take over this oil-rich region and particularly the heart of Persia. I mean, the part of Arabic culture that has the longest, deepest intellectual, social, political, cultural, rich history is the Persian population. So they got a special thrill out of governing Persia. And then,
it was a big win for those guys. And and this is why I've always been against communism, because it all started with those commies taking over. They got tricked. And then the people, they just use the people. It's just so
people sort of fell into the Cold War divide, and mostly it was because the Ottoman Empire was so weak for about a century, that it left so much of the Middle East in chaos,
shambles.
No real way to surge into it. And then oil gets discovered in large parts of it, like Saudi Arabia.
I love the book All the Shah's Men. It really kind of like goes into what exactly happened with regards to like Iran and the takeover, and that if you guys want to know more about that, you should check out that book. Really quick, let me get this massive super chat here from Steve C. Thank you. Says for $20, Balt and Bankrupt has excellent YouTube series visiting Eastern Europe and Russian small towns. It's a great view if you want to see the people, not the politics. That's a really good suggestion. I also had a really good chat with Eva Bartlett. She
Yep.
is kind of like on the ground reporter over there right now she's in Russia, but she goes back and forth, and she like has nothing but nice things to say about Russian people because she's there on the ground. She's dealt with Russian people forever. I think it's just one of those things, like, again, they try to divide and conquer, right? Like, and people are always very similar. We're more similar than we're not, in every single culture. And that's like what happened again. Like, that's why I always bring up Mexico, because it's like that about Mexico. A lot of people just think like so many different things about Mexico. But once I thought like that until I came and lived here. And then once you kind of live here and you experience the culture, experience the food, experience the people, and then you realize, wow, we're really not that different. And it's just so weird that they want us all to hate each other.
I was treated great in Cancun. Now, of course, it was at a club, and the reason was because apparently someone had led them to believe I was an American gangster,
Oh.
and so they treated me fantastic.
Well, they
But
treat extra, yeah. They treat you extra well if they think you're in the cartel. They'll be like, "Oh my god!"
I was like, I just remember lots of women pouring lots of alcohol in. So and everybody being like super nice. I was like, what is going on? Like,
they're great here. I mean, now you got a friend here. So next time you come down to Cancun, we're gonna have to get together for drinks, and it'll be a good time.
Beautiful, beautiful part of the world.
Love it. It's like paradise here, other than the cartels. It's paradise.
Yes.
Thank you for the 279. John Burns says the family weaponized medical pain relief. The family that weaponized medical pain relief. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm not sure what he's referencing.
That was probably at the time of a conversation. Wolf Spain for $5. I'm way too young, as I was born in the 90s. Aw, you're a baby. But I did hear that Vegas was better when the mob was running it.
Kind of. So
I've
it depends
heard
on what
this
you
too.
value. I mean, here's the thing. Steve Wynn was the real genius of Las Vegas. Because before Steve Wynn, it was just a place where you would take in a show, get a good meal, and gamble.
Mhm.
But after him, it was a place you came for shopping. It was a place you came as a spa. It was a place you came where your kids could have a bunch of fun. And so he revolutionized it from a very limited kind of gambling-based resort town to just the ultimate place to host a convention, the ultimate place to have a cheap, if you want a cheap vacation, you can do that. You want a mid-scale vacation, you can do that. You want to do a high-scale, upscale vacation, you can do that. He really revolutionized the town. So I would never say it's better with the mob, given how Wynn changed it. But if Wynn had not changed it, the mob knew how to run a cleaner, more efficient shop than their successors, their private corporate successors did.
Wait, is that the guy's name? Like, that's the hotel? Like, is that like really?
Now
That's interesting.
he screwed over his wife, and his wife paid him back like 20 years later.
Oh no.
He became a Trump ally, so he's out now. He's no longer in control of any aspect of Wynn. But yeah, Wynn, Encore, all that's him.
That's him. Oh wow. Okay.
He did the Golden Nugget. He did Treasure Island. I think it's Treasure Island. No, I think it was Mirage. He went to Mirage, then Bellagio.
Oh, Mirage. Okay.
All that was him. He recreated Vegas. Modern Vegas.
That's cool.
Is Steve Wynn's invention. Guy's a pure genius.
I really used to love Vegas. Like, I haven't been to Vegas for years. But I mean, obviously, especially since the pandemic hit, I haven't been to the United States since this whole thing happened. But I used to love going to Vegas. And then, but Vegas is only fun for like, as I would say 2 nights tops, like maybe 3 if you're really in a Vegas mood. But like after that, you're like, okay, like I need to go home. Like it's just one of those places that you're like, okay, I've had enough debauchery for a couple of days. I need to go home. But that's really cool. I didn't know about the history of Vegas. That was a cool little, this.
Exactly.
Then we got John Burns for $6.99 says John Ratzberger talked about manufacturing jobs disappearing back in the 90s. #America made. Then we have John Beck for 5 says, for a non-serious topic, Robert Barnes, what are some good Persian restaurants in LA? I'm guessing in the West Side. And Nina's opinion. Oh my God, I had to get you that thing. I forgot to ask. I'm sorry. He was asking me last night what the best Persian restaurant is in LA. What do you think?
I don't have a specific name favorite, so I would just trust my Persian friends to go wherever they thought was the best.
Right. I know one and I forgot the name and I have to get it from my sister-in-law. I will get it to you, the John Beck. I will, but I haven't had the chance yet. John Burns for 279 says, great 30 for 30, the 2 Escobars. Check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
There really were 2 Escobars.
Oh, I was going to ask you this. Have you ever seen The Wire?
Oh, of course. Cited it and quoted from it in court cases.
I love that show. That's one of my favorite shows of all time. I would go on to say I think that it's one of the best TV shows ever made.
Oh, yes.
It's so terrific in the sense of how realistic it is compared to what is actually going on and the corruption, like it's just everything. And I always found it fascinating that, like I remember I read the article about one of the creators of The Wire was talking about how they meant to do it as the 5 pillars of American society, and each season is based on the pillar. And I thought it was really, really cool. So I'm glad that you've seen it.
It's
I'm
fantastic, top notch.
I thought you would. I thought you would enjoy it. So I'm glad that that you've seen it. Wilson for $5 says, I remember a JRE episode revealing that some feds deliberately created the war on drugs as a way to control BLK Black Americans while profiting on tree farms.
I mean, it's always been a degree of social control, and that's been reflected in criminal justice selective enforcement policies.
Mm-hmm. John Burns, thank you again for 279. What never? No, never. What never? Well,
Indeed.
Yeah, he's always like, maybe someday by the end of time, maybe possibly someday we'll be able to not wear the masks again. Maybe someday, possibly, but most likely not. So
indeed.
That's my best Fauci. The John Beck for 2. Daily Wire is so proud to air BB saying this. I
don't think they process
Benjamin.
it fully, but I get the Daily Wire's doing it earlier, but doing it now makes Israel look idiotic, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's weird. This Scratchpad for $10 says these digitalized medical records are often useless to actually help you. What they are good at is charging you enormous monthly fees and send you off to a trip of pointless examinations. This is very true.
Yeah. And it's if they have your records, they can control you. And if they have that digital chip that has your medical information, has your financial information, and maybe even access to medical and financial services contingent upon it, that's a great degree of centralized control.
Well, it's insane because a lot of people are always calling out, like people like the Daily Wire are always calling out places like China and like, it's the CRT or sorry, China.
The social credit score. And all
the
that.
social credit score, like all
and
this
now
stuff. And then
cheering it on when
and then it's like Netanyahu comes out and he's like, yeah, we're doing the same thing. We've been doing it. We're number one. We're like the Jennifer Lawrence of this. Like, we've been doing this. We're the first to ever do it. And we're great. And we've done it forever. And we're like, what? And they're like, yes. Like, oh my God, how fantastic for us. And like Israel and blah, blah. Like your people are being used as guinea pigs and you're totally fine with this. Like, how fucking crazy are you? Drives me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
John Burns for 279, 25 years a year waiting period in Saudi Arabia for a house. What?
I'm unaware of that.
I don't know. That's crazy. Matthew Hammond for $4.99 says Robert Barnes is great. How many of these revolutions have turned out in the West's favor outside of maybe Chile in the 1973 to 1990, and he was a despot?
How many of those? Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, and well, many times that was deliberate. We're not really looking for independent democratic people to govern places. To
No.
be frank about it, that's just not in the perceived geopolitical interest of the people who are doing these things.
Yeah, and
That's the excuse and the pretext, but it's never the actual reason.
it's exactly what's going on in Iran. It's just they just want
Yeah.
to control it in a
Well,
different
of course,
way.
they want somebody, and the problem is they keep screwing up more often than not when they try to get involved.
Yeah, and you know what's so crazy about Iran? And I've always said this about the government. I'm like, they're so fucking dumb. They're so dumb because all they have to do, all the Ayatollah has to do is make the hijab not mandatory anymore. Just be like, hey, we've
Mhm.
caught up with the times, and we're just gonna make the hijab just not mandatory anymore. Like you have the choice to wear
Yep.
it. If you want to wear it, wear it. If you don't want to, you don't want to have to wear it. The West's BS cry about Iran will die out because there's no other, like, there's nothing else they can say. Because, like I said, women are in prominent places of power in Iran. They're very happy with the way things are going. They're in high places of government. They have all sorts of jobs. They're very well respected. The only thing that's different is that scarf and the hijab thing. And if they get rid of it, then the West won't even have a thing to say about them anymore. And they just won't do it. They just won't do it. And it's just like, you want to shut the West up? Just get rid of this thing and then you'll be fine. And they just won't do it. It's so crazy to me. It's just
Well,
like,
I think it's because it's broader geopolitical interest that they actually care about.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so complicated, but it's also not that complicated. Thank you for that super chat. John Burns for 279. There's more than US sanctions on Iran. UN 4X. This is also true. Let me get this big one that came in. Master Alliance for $25. Thank you. Says, I love the conversation tonight. Hi, Nina, and nice to meet you, Robert. Great content. Hey, you definitely want to sub to Robert. All of his links is in the description down below, including his website. You want to check him out. You want to check out his cases that he's been through, he's done. He's a really cool guy. Also, I did forget to put the Viva and Barnes local link, but you want to check them out on locals as well. You especially want to check them out on locals. So there you go. And of course, up to Viva, because he's always hanging out with Viva on his channel. So they have a great podcast together. So entertaining. Thank you for that. We got XSL for $2. Advice on becoming an immigration lawyer.
Work for a clinic or someplace that does a lot of immigration work for free so that you learn how the trade is done.
Okay. There you go.
Or intern for free with an immigration lawyer.
There you go. John Burns for $6.99. Trump gets elected. Dave Chappelle's friends. We're leaving. You coming? Dave's all, nah. I'm gonna see how this plays out. For another $2.79. Charlie Wilson's War. SGFU FFS for $5 says, hey, Bob. What about the movie that pushed Mel Gibson over the edge? Conspiracy Theory. That was Mel declaring war on the deep state 25 years ago.
Well, Mel's father he has some beliefs I don't share. I'll put it that way. But they've been but he's been an anti-establishment guy his whole life, Mel's father. So I think that's also where Mel inherited that.
I didn't know that actually about his dad. I do remember that movie. That was a good movie. Wait, who's his dad?
His dad's not in film or anything else, but let's just say he and Kanye would get along these days.
Oh, no. Well, I remember that. That's why he got canceled originally, because he went all crazy about like that whole thing.
Yeah, he was right up the road at Moon Shadows, and he got,
Yeah.
got a little toasty, and they got pulled over. And, he was a little drunk, and he shared some of his dad's views of the world.
Oh no! Oh no! That's terrible. But I do remember that movie, and I thought that was a good movie. It was really like
very
like
solid,
a basic
very solid.
premise of what conspiracy theories are like, and like what that is. But it's very good if you're like new
a little
into
bit of
it.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, Parallax View is probably better on that, and some other ones. I probably have to head out here in a few minutes.
Okay. No worries. We're just about to finish up here. SCFU again for $2. How about Stuart Copeland's Evil Book, Dad Miles? I have never read that. John Burns for $6.99. When things were legalized in Colorado and Washington State, Mr. Corolla said states with Euro populations, things are better when they calm down. Bert $5 says rest in peace, Pele. I enjoyed Robert Barnes' World Cup coverage on Sports War. Wait, what? You did that?
Sports Wars. Yeah. So my brother and I and my nephew did a bunch of breakdowns of the World Cup throughout the World Cup.
I can't believe I missed those.
Yeah, you can get them either at Sports Wars, or which is part of the Geeks and Gamers network.
Yeah.
We also do like Against the Spread show on Wednesdays when I'm available to break down the week's games coming up. I think we have a college football playoff preview that's about to be posted up on Sports Wars. People can also find it at I give out picks for games at sportspicks.locals.com.
I didn't know about any of this. How did I not know about this?
It's a little side hobby.
That's awesome, dude. That's amazing. Okay. And am I into soccer?
I agree. It was the best final since '86, and
Oh my
I love
God.
seeing Lionel Messi win. I think he's the greatest ever. I think Pele will justifiably be considered the greatest ever because he won three World Cups, which is going to be very hard for anyone else to ever replicate. But until they do, I think Pele will be seen as the greatest player ever. But in my view, Lionel Messi is the greatest player to ever play the game.
That was an amazing game. Like was so crazy. Am I into soccer? Like, well, I was born in Iran, so yes, I'm into soccer in a sense that that is the true football.
U.S. or Iran in the U.S.-Iran game that came down to the wire. That was a great game, by the way.
I was like, I can't watch this. I was like, yeah, I can't watch this right now.
Or cheering for Mexico. I mean, Mexican fans.
I was definitely cheering for Mexico. I was very disappointed in Mexico.
I thought
so were a lot of Mexicans. But it's so funny here though, because they just use any excuse to drink. So if it's like, if they won, it was like the happy drinking, but it was not. So it was the sad drinking. That was the bad part. So yes, I am into soccer, but like not on a regular basis. I switched over to the NBA for a while until they went all woke, and now I'm not into that either. Let me get these ones and then we're done. John Burns for $2.79. A family convicted of profiting selling opioids.
Yeah, that big family that made a lot of money on it and never went to jail magically.
That's insane. The John Beck for $2. Hijab is the mask, visible compliance. Very true. Scratchpad for $5 says the real Pfizer agreement with Israel was classified for around 70 years. If I remember correctly, the Israeli people don't know what they agreed to. Didn't they agree to release those files earlier though?
Supposedly, and now there's talk they can't locate them or something.
Are you serious? Oh my God, that's funny. We can't find it. I don't know. I'll find it. Anyway, John Burns for $2.79. Sugar Bleep didn't help Mel's case. Oh no. And then for another $2.79, 1970 Brazil team was so good they gave them trophy. Thank you, Robert Barnes, for coming to hang out with me tonight. We're definitely gonna have to do this again at some point because you're just awesome and I love hanging out with you.
Absolutely. It was fantastic.
You're welcome back anytime, man. Thank you. John Burns again for $2.79. Canada got shafted in their first match by ref. They
played some beautiful ball, and all of them are going to get a chance in 4 years because it's going to be co-hosted by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
Yes, and I'm like, we're going because I'm definitely going to go to the Mexico games. Like, I'm 100% going to go to at least one of the Mexico games, maybe the one in Mexico City or something.
Oh, yeah. That's a great stadium.
We have to go to at least one. Like, it's in the 3 countries that we all live in. So it's like, there's no way that, that I'm going to miss that. But Robert, again, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was awesome to talk to you. And let's do it again soon. Did you want to plug anything before you leave?
No. If anybody wants to follow any of the other content, just vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Peace, everybody.
Go, guys. Check him out. Everybody, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for all the super chats. Thank you for all the membership messages, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time. Bye.